What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name's CJ. This, of course, is Out of Bounds DFS. And in today's video, we're going to be doing some first look of the NBA PrizePicks board for March 24th. It's 12:40 p.m. here on the East Coast. So just keep in mind that all the projections and the single stat props that you see in today's video are subject to change, and they typically do throughout the day, especially when news breaks. They start seeing more action on an over and under. PrizePicks is pretty good about adjusting those projections. So if this is your first time to the channel, welcome to Out of Bounds DFS. On this channel, we do all things single player daily fantasy sports. Our main focus for today's video is PrizePicks and NBA, but we do talk some of the other sites like Monkey Knife Fight. I've mentioned other sports as well, such as college basketball, NHL. So if you're into that sort of thing, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications. There's still about 48% of you who watch these videos who are not subscribed. So if you're here every day and you're watching the video, just hit the subscribe button. It helps me out, helps the channel grow. And speaking of growth, we are over 720 members so far subscribed to the YouTube channel since January 1st. Loving that support. Thank you so much for that. And our Discord community is well over 500 members as well. So guys, tremendous volume from January 1st up until now. So I appreciate all of that support and you guys continuing to pour out your love for what I'm doing here. So thank you very much. Now, what I've been doing here, yesterday's video, today's video has been taking submissions from our Discord community. By the way, if you're not a Discord member yet, it's totally free for you to join. We've got a Discord community all set up, ready to go for PrizePicks and a bunch of other things. But if you want to join, there's a link down in the description of this video. Definitely join there. Well, I've been taking submissions from both our regular members and our premium members, and they've been giving us some fantastic plays to take a look at. I researched these for you in today's video, and we kind of go from there and see if these plays over, under, whichever way you're leaning, make sense or don't make sense. So we help to land on some good picks, hopefully. So without further ado, we've got a pretty large NBA slate today to talk about. We're going to kind of start things off here by going over some fantasy points. But before we do that, we have to talk injury news. Now, the Milwaukee Bucks are going to be without Giannis Antetokounmpo, so it seems. He's questionable with a left knee sprain. LaMelo Ball, he's out for the Charlotte Hornets indefinitely with a wrist injury. Kevin Durant, he continues to sit out for the Brooklyn Nets. Kyrie Irving will be out for the Nets as well. Malcolm Brogdon, Indiana Pacers, he's questionable with lower back soreness. Miles Turner, Indiana Pacers, is also questionable with ankle sprain. Cody Zeller, Charlotte Hornets, questionable with shoulder bursitis. That doesn't sound good. Marvin Bagley III, Sacramento Kings big man. He's going to be out indefinitely with a hand injury. Serge Ibaka, Los Angeles Clippers. He's out with a back injury. Darius Bazley, Oklahoma City Thunder, out with a shoulder injury. And then some of these other ones here that get an impact rating of 8. You see Wayne Ellington, Kevin Love, Kevin Porter Jr., Malik Beasley, and Tristan Thompson. So those are the main injury news stories that we have to look out for today. Of course, when news and injury, that type of stuff breaks, we have to be ready to react and ready to move. So that's part of what I do for some of you premium members out there is help you get prepared for what could be potential injury news and how we will act accordingly. So with injuries out of the way, we can start talking about some of these picks that you guys want me to look at. So the first one's going to be Chris Middleton, Milwaukee Bucks swingman. He is projected for 38 fantasy points. Dat Dude Sick 25 in our Discord community has asked me to look into Chris Middleton and his fantasy points at 38 and see if taking the over makes sense or not. In other words, over or under. So we're going to do that for you right now. So the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at this game. So we got the game totals, both Boston and Milwaukee here. Pretty high game totals, looking at about 230 combined points here between these two teams with a 5-point spread. So very high game totals. That's looking good. If you're looking to take the overs on anybody for fantasy points, real life points, rebounds, assists, heck, maybe even the new one, 3-pointers. Yes, they've added 3-pointers to single stats. So we'll be looking at those a little later on as well. But so far, so good in terms of game total and spread. It doesn't look like it's going to be a blowout. Probably put this one in a yellow in terms of blowout risk or blowout potential. But yeah, things are looking good so far. So let's just look at the Milwaukee side of things real quick. We got Chris Middleton projected for 35.8 fantasy points on Roto Grinders, which puts him a bit lower than this 38 over on PrizePicks. Now, this is factoring in that Giannis Antetokounmpo will play. We don't know if he's going to play or not. That's injury news that we're going to have to wait and see on. But scoring wings in this matchup against Boston have struggled for the most part. Chris Middleton averaging just, I'm sorry, not Chris Middleton, but scoring wings averaging just 22 fantasy points per game. So let's take a look at Middleton's recent game logs here, and we'll see if 38 has been a number he's gone over or under on in his last few games. So we go back to Game 5, which was against the Washington Wizards. Of course, they're a fantastic team to play against if you're an opposing team. All the points and the rebounds and the assists and everything goes up typically when you play against Washington. Very high-paced team. So against Washington, he drops 41, which puts him over 38. And then he goes down to 34.5, putting him under 20.8 under, 33.5 under, and then he bounces back against Indiana. Of course, no Giannis in that game, to 41.6, putting him over 38. So you could see in his last 5 games, he's gone over 38 just twice, under 3 times. Now, do we have a previous matchup here recently against Boston? I don't see one. I'm sure they've probably played, but I don't see one recently. So we'll move on. We'll talk minutes. He's expected to play about 34 minutes tonight. Already mentioned scoring wings against Boston. They tend to struggle. This will be 2 games and 3 nights for Middleton, 33.4 minutes per game, 1.1 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of 25.67. So there you have it. Chris Middleton, 38 fantasy points right now. It's looking like the under's the way to go, especially if Giannis Antetokounmpo is active tonight. I would definitely take the under on 38. All right, so the next one that we have is Caris LeVert over fantasy points. And my friend D. Rich Sosa from our Discord community sent this one in to me. He wanted me to take a look at Caris LeVert. Now, of course, we've already mentioned that Malcolm Brogdon is a little iffy to play tonight. So if he doesn't play, then maybe Caris LeVert is a guy that we want to take the over on. But let's take a look and see where he's at so far here. Now, in this game, Indiana's projected for 112 points. Detroit, 106 points. So you're talking about a 6-point spread here. Fairly low game totals. So not loving what I'm seeing on the board so far in terms of taking overs on anyone, unless Malcolm Brogdon's ruled out. Then Caris LeVert steps into a much larger role, as we saw the other night. So, talking Caris LeVert here, he is projected at 30.41 fantasy points by our friends at Roto Grinders, which would put him over 29 fantasy points on PrizePicks. Now, scoring wings in this matchup have not done well. In other words, Detroit does a pretty good job of limiting scoring wings, giving them just 21 fantasy points per game, a little over that on a per game basis. So Caris LeVert, obviously he underwent a pretty serious surgery. He has come back, played a handful of games. So let's take a look at his game logs and see what he's been up to. While things continue to load and spin as the world turns. Wow. I think we're setting a record here for how long something takes to load. Let's try it again here and see if we can get this to pop up. Oh boy. Oh boy. Apparently, I have lost internet connection. I will be right back. And I'm back. So you gotta love when your internet connection drops in the middle of a YouTube video. But anyway, we've got Caris LeVert's game logs pulled up here finally, and you can see what he's been up to in his last several games. On this 29 fantasy score number, 20 puts him under. He goes over, over, under, and then a big over in his last game against Milwaukee. Of course, I believe Brogdon and Turner were both ruled out for that game, so Caris LeVert had an opportunity to get plenty of run and plenty of fantasy points. So overall, yeah, Caris LeVert, I think going over fantasy points makes some sense here, but I especially like it if Malcolm Brogdon sits out again. So there you have it, D. Rich Sosa, Caris LeVert. Now, my man D. Rich Sosa was not done there. He sent in another pick, Kyle Lowry over fantasy points. So we're going to take a look at Kyle Lowry. His name is being talked about quite a bit here lately in trade rumors and trade talks. Kyle Lowry's projected at 34 fantasy points tonight. Let's take a look at the board here and see where this game stacks up. We got Toronto at 110.5 points, taking on the Denver Nuggets, who are at 112.5. So as far as game totals go, 222, 223 combined points, looking pretty healthy there. The spread also looking like a competitive one. This game should stay close. It should stay competitive. So Kyle Lowry at 34. They like him to go over on RotoGrinders at 35.18, putting him over by just over 1 point. Now let's look at his recent game logs here. As we know, Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam have been out for the Toronto Raptors. In fact, OG Anunoby has been out. They've, pretty much put it all on Kyle Lowry's shoulders, and I would say Norman Powell as well. But on this 34 fantasy score, he's went over, then he goes under with just 28, goes barely over 34, and then 38 there. So he's got 4 overs in his last 5 games. So looking pretty good here in terms of his success rate of going over 34. So liking the way that's looking. Now this matchup here, combo guards. They are allowed over 44 fantasy points per game, according to RotoGrinders here. Denver, not a very good team at guarding opposing point guards or combo guards in this case. Now, Kyle Lowry is on a 3 games and 4 nights rest situation, playing 35 minutes per game. Very healthy total there. 1.05 fantasy points per minute and a usage rating of over 23. So this 34 number is definitely obtainable here for Kyle Lowry. I do think that going over is a smart choice, a wise choice, especially when the game totals are pretty healthy and the spread is competitive, meaning that these guys should get plenty of minutes and the game should stay close and competitive. So I do like the Kyle Lowry over fantasy points. Now the next person we have up here is Thaddeus Young. Thaddeus Young over fantasy points to be exact. So if we go down here and we find Thad Young, he has been a model of consistency. And what I mean by that is when I looked at his game logs recently, I was surprised at how often Thaddeus Young has went over 28 fantasy points. Guy has just been on point, let's just say. So we'll head on over to this game here. Chicago taking on Cleveland tonight. That game tips off at 8 p.m. Chicago, 111 points. So pretty big total there for the Chicago side of things. Nice, healthy total. Spread, probably putting it in the yellow to orange range. This game could blow out. Cleveland's just not a very good basketball team. Not saying Chicago's great, but they are a lot better than Cleveland. So Thaddeus Young here at 28. He's projected at 31 over on RotoGrinders. So they like the over on Thaddeus Young, and I think that I do too. Another thing playing into Thaddeus Young's favor is the fact that versatile forwards against the Cavaliers have been afforded almost 32 to 33 fantasy points per game. So I'm liking the potential here for Thaddeus Young to go over, pending that he gets enough minutes to do so. So let's look at his recent game logs, and you guys can see what I'm talking about with this fantasy score of 28 points and how well Thaddeus Young has done going over 28 in his recent games. So if you see here, this last column, his fantasy points column, this is probably about 12 games, we'll just say. So he's went over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a row. He falls short here. Then he comes back to start a new streak. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he's went over 28 fantasy points in like 15 out of 16 games. Why do they keep projecting him at 28? I don't know, but as long as they do, and as long as he keeps producing at the level that he is, I'm going to keep clicking the over on Thaddeus Young, and I think that you should too. So I do like the over on Thaddeus Young fantasy points until he lets me down more than once. If he starts to like go under 28 for a couple of games, then I'll be like, all right, it's time to back off Thaddeus Young. But for right now, I think the over is a good way to go. So good pick there by Truly Pistol. Now, he's got another one that he dropped in on me, and that is Luka Doncic under fantasy points. Luka Doncic under fantasy points. So I've got Luka at 57 on PrizePicks. If we take a look at RotoGrinders, Luka Doncic has been a little shaky lately. Little shaky, but he does get a good matchup here against Minnesota. Now, the game totals are looking fantastic here. You're talking about well over 230 combined points here. The spread is a little bit worrisome, though. It's an 8.5-point spread, which means that this game could potentially blow out. You're talking about a spread that's big enough to where I got to put it in the red zone here. For sure in orange, but definitely creeping into red in terms of blowout potential. I just don't think Minnesota's got the guns to stick around with these Mavericks if you're picking up what I'm putting down. So with Luka Doncic at 57, they've got him at 56 over on Roto Grinders. So let's take a look at his recent game logs and see how he's been doing with a projection of 57. So in his last few games since the All-Star break, we'll start back here at San Antonio. He drops 48 points. Good number, but not good enough to go over 57. Then he misses the next game against OKC, comes back, comes back and goes under again with just 42 points. Then he's got 60 putting him over, 73 puts him over, 61 puts him over, and then 46.4, he's back under 57 again. So in his last handful of games here, he's went over 57 fantasy points just 3 times out of about 5 or 6 games. So he's been a tough nut to crack, a tough cookie here. Hard guy to figure out. It's been truly a up and down situation here for Luka Doncic in his recent games. Now, this matchup is a favorable one. Combo guards are allowed almost 50 fantasy points per game to this Minnesota Timberwolves team. Helping things out here is the fact that Luka should be well rested. He's not coming off of a back-to-back. This isn't 2 games in 3 nights or anything crazy. So this is a good situation in terms of rest. He should come out fresh and ready to go. He's playing over 35 minutes per game this season, 1.49 fantasy points per minute. And his usage rating is over 35.26 to be exact. So, yeah, I think this is just a risky spot. I do like the matchup. I do think that there's potential here with the points total being what they are for him to go over. But if I'm playing Luka Doncic over, it's probably going to only be in a first half format. Otherwise, this game looks like a blowout, and maybe I would lean toward the under in a full game format. So there you have it. The next guy we're going to talk about is John Wall. John Wall and the Houston Rockets. Wall been playing some pretty good basketball, kind of under the radar, low key. They finally broke their losing streak, and John Wall had a big part in that. I believe he had a triple-double the other night. So tonight he's projected at 38 fantasy points. Truly pistol. He's wanting to take the under. We're going to see if he's got a good point there, or maybe we should flip the table and go over John Wall on this 38 fantasy points. Let's take a look. All right, Houston projected for 110 points, Charlotte 113. So in terms of game total, this one's not too bad. It's over 220 points, looking at about 223 points. Spread is good here, just a 3-point spread, meaning the game should stay close and hopefully competitive, which plays into John Wall's favor. Now, over on Roto Grinders, they got him at 37.9, putting him just shy of 38, but that's close enough for me to round up, and we can call it 38 on PrizePicks, 38 on Roto Grinders. Now, in this matchup, combo guards against the Charlotte Hornets have done well, over 49 fantasy points per game allowed by this Hornets team. Now, let's look at his recent game logs and see how he's been performing. All right, we'll look at his last 3 because he did have a long layoff here. Now, against Detroit, man, allergies. Back on March 19th, John Wall had just 29 fantasy points, but he only played 28 minutes in his defense. Now, in his last 2 games where he's played 35 and 36 minutes, you can see his fantasy production is way up, 42.9 and 53.2. So the key here is get John Wall more minutes. If he's playing 35 or more minutes, I do like his chances of going over 38. Because even if we go back to his game log even further here, 41 minutes equals 45 fantasy points. 39 minutes equals 46 fantasy points. Now you can see just 26 minutes, 9 fantasy points. Not good. 36 minutes, 42 fantasy points. You kind of see what I'm saying here. 35 more fantasy points, this guy should get over 38, especially given this great matchup. Now tonight, he is projected to play 34 minutes. Something to keep in mind, though, is Victor Oladipo, as of right now, looks like he is on track to play. So he could cut into John Wall's productivity here, which would be a good reason to take the under on John Wall. So there you have it for Wall. Game totals are looking pretty good. The spread's looking pretty healthy. Looks like it's going to be one that's going to stay competitive. So John Wall, typically smashing if he gets 35 or more minutes. Tonight, projected for 34 minutes. And then you got to think about Victor Oladipo's back, Christian Wood's in there. So how much basketball will there be to go around for John Wall and company to share? I don't know. Another guy that we're going to talk about is Dallas Mavericks forward Kristaps Porzingis. Truly Pistol again dropping a dime here. He wants to take the under on Porzingis and his fantasy points. So let's look at Kristaps Porzingis. We've already talked about this game a little bit here in terms of high game totals, but a potential blowout. So we'll look at Kristaps Porzingis as we've already talked. Luka Doncic. Now, Porzingis is at 41 on PrizePicks, but he's only at 38.83 over on RotoGrinders, which means he's going to be under, according to RotoGrinders. Now, he is a versatile big man. Versatile bigs typically score a little over 34 fantasy points per game against this Minnesota Timberwolves squad. So it's not a terrible matchup, but not a plus matchup either for Porzingis. Now, on this 41 fantasy points in his last 5 games, he's only went over 1 time, and that was back against Denver on March 13th. He has went under, and under by quite a bit in 4 straight games. So the under on Kristaps Porzingis is making a lot of sense here, and I can see why Truly Pistol would probably want to take him under given his recent game performance and the fact that this game is expected to blow out. The only reason or only way that you would take Kristaps Porzingis over is if you think that he's going to have a big hand in the reason that Dallas blows out Minnesota. And he might. I mean, that might be the case, but I'm only taking Kristaps Porzingis over in a half game format probably. And I don't even know if I like that. So yeah, I think Kristaps Porzingis under makes a lot of sense. Now, we already talked Victor Oladipo just for a second there earlier when I was mentioning John Wall, but he's another guy that Truly Pistol, feeling the under on Victor Oladipo. Let's take a look and see here if Oladipo under makes some sense as he looks to make his return back to this Houston Rockets starting lineup. We've already mentioned this game having pretty decent totals. The spread is competitive, so guys like Oladipo, Wall should play pretty big minutes here. Now, he's projected at 37 on PrizePicks, but 35.8 on RotoGrinders, so you can see that there's a little bit of a difference there, more than a point under for RotoGrinders. But again, he is also classified as a combo guard like John Wall, meaning that this matchup here is a good one as this Hornets team is allowing almost 50 fantasy points per game to combo guards. But if you look at Victor Oladipo's game logs, man, they are ugly. He doesn't typically play a lot of back-to-backs. He does come in and out of the starting lineup, or the lineup, I should say, in terms of how active he is. So we got to kind of go back here a ways, all the way back to March 11th. He drops 40.3 points, which is good enough for the over, but then he misses the next game. He comes back going over 37, over 37 again with 41, misses the next game against the Warriors, comes back against Detroit, just 24 points. And then finally, his last game, which was against his former team, the Oklahoma City Thunder, he puts up 45 fantasy points, putting him over. So, bit of a spotty-looking game log, but pretty consistent if you consider all things here. In his last 5 games, going over 37 fantasy points, 4 out of 5. But yes, there is the conundrum that Christian Wood is back and he's playing big minutes now. John Wall will be in the lineup and he should be playing big minutes. Now, there's no Eric Gordon and maybe no Kevin Porter Jr., so maybe Oladipo gets a little bit more run, but this is another one of those situations, you know, just Houston in general is hard to trust for me just because these guys have been so modular. Their starting lineup, different names, different faces in and out of the lineup. It's just hard to predict these guys, and I typically just put a big red X up when it comes to any of the Rockets guys and fade them, you know, in situations like these. So, all right, and finally, the last person we're going to look at in terms of fantasy points is going to be DeMar DeRozan. And this one's coming from D. Rich Sosa. He likes the over on DeMar DeRozan. So let's head on down to the San Antonio Spurs versus the Los Angeles Clippers. We've got DeMar DeRozan tipping off here at 8:40 p.m., projected for 37 fantasy points. So let's take a look at this game total and spread and see if we like DeRozan over or maybe he goes under. Now, the Clippers are expected to score 112.75 points. They are the favorite in this game by about 4 to 5 points here. So if we look at DeMar DeRozan, His projections at 37 on PrizePicks, 39.64 over on RotoGrinders. So they like him to go over by almost 2.5 to 3 points. So the over looking like the way to go. Now, I will caution you that if both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George play, which they should for whatever reason, if they're ruled out, then I do like DeRozan a little bit more. But if they're both in, man, this is a staunch Los Angeles Clippers defense, meaning they're tough, man. They're tough against guys like DeMar DeRozan. Now let's look at his recent game logs and see what he's been up to here. If we go back to 5 games ago against OKC, all the way back on March 4th, you can see he goes well under 37 with just 29 fantasy points. His next game against Denver smashes 57 fantasy points, but then he misses 4 games in a row. Now after that layoff, he comes back to face the Cavaliers, just 28 fantasy points in a very good matchup against that Cavs squad. His next 2 games, 53.1 and 40.9. He does go over 37 fantasy points in those. So all in all, his last 5 games, he has went over tonight's projection of 37.3 out of 5 times. Now, if we head over here and take a look at the rest of DeMar DeRozan's projections for tonight, he's at 35 minutes according to our friends at RotoGrinders. This matchup, not a good one on paper. Scoring wings held to just 23 to 24 fantasy points per game on average, so not looking like a great matchup on paper. For the season, he's playing over 34 minutes, 1.15 fantasy points per minute, plus a usage rating of nearly 25. So those numbers are looking pretty good for DeRozan here. I'm just worried about this matchup. So yeah, D. Rich Sosa, you're liking the over on fantasy points, but I would caution you on that. I would be careful, okay? Because this game total for the San Antonio side, not looking great. And there's a chance that this Los Angeles Clippers squad puts the clamps down on DeMar DeRozan. So there you have it for him. Now that's going to wrap things up in terms of our fantasy projections. Now we're going to start looking at some of the single stat stuff. Now the first pick for our single stat portion of today's video is going to come from Austin in our Discord group. So I appreciate you, Austin, for dropping this one. And he's liking a couple of picks here today. Let's see if we've got the first one here up on the board. I'm not seeing it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, Michael Porter Jr. over real life points. So we're going to scroll back up here to the top of the PrizePicks board. And man, there's a lot of names. We go to single stat. We got points selected. He's liking Michael Porter Jr. for the 2nd day in a row to go over 16.5 fantasy points. Now, a lot of us had Michael Porter Jr. over 16.5 points last night. It looked a little shaky, but man, late in the game against my Orlando Magic, Michael Porter Jr. got it done, hitting a couple of big threes in the late stages of that game, and it put him over 16.5 real life points in that one. So let's look at this game real quick. Denver, 112.5 points on their side. Toronto, 110.5. I've already talked about this one a little bit. It's pretty good in terms of game totals, very good in terms of spread. This one doesn't look like it's going to blow out. So let's take a look at Michael Porter Jr. real quick and see how he's been scoring the basketball lately. Now, if we scroll over to the real life points here, you can see that 16.5 points, he went over in most of his games. So we go and look at the last 5 games. He's went over, 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 over. Just like an automatic over in his last 5 games. So far, I would say that the over on Michael Porter Jr.'s points at 16.5 are looking very, very good here. Now, we could take things a step further. We could head over to lineups.com. We'll go down and click on the Denver Nuggets team. And we can look at the season averages for Michael Porter Jr. in terms of scoring. You can see for the season, 15.9 points. That puts him under. But if we go down to his last 30 games, he is at 15.9 points there. But in his last 10 games is where you start to see a spike. He goes up to 19.8 real life points in his last 10 games. So last 5 games, he's went over 5 in a row. In his last 10 games, he's averaging nearly 20 points per game. So I'm liking the over on Michael Porter Jr. once again in this particular matchup. the last thing we're going to do is we're going to head over to RotoWire, where we can take a look at the props, if there are any, for Michael Porter Jr. and his real life points tonight. So I type in the name Porter. Boom, comes up. DraftKings does not have a single stat point prop up for Michael Porter Jr. FanDuel does. Now, surprisingly, at 16.5 points, most of the folks are taking the under on that 16.5. But if we head over to PointsBet, they've also got him up at 16.5. Most folks are leaning toward the under once again on Michael Porter Jr. So I would love to take Michael Porter Jr. over like Austin suggests, but some of these sports books make me a little hesitant. But if I were to lean one way or the other, it would probably be toward the over on MPJ in the 16.5 points. Don't know if I like it as much as I did last night, but I think it is looking good given how consistent he has been going over. So thank you, Austin, for that pick. The next pick that I have here that they wanted me to take a look at comes from Lee in our premium PrizePicks Discord community. Now, he's got Josh Richardson of the Dallas Mavericks going over his real life point prop. So if we head on down the line here, we could see Josh Richardson is at 14.5 points over on PrizePicks. So let's take a look and see how that stacks up here. So we've already talked about this game a little bit, having big totals in terms of the Dallas Mavericks side, 119, almost 120 real life points. Let's look at Josh Richardson's last few games and see if 14.5 has been a number he's been going over or under on. All right. So we scroll over here. We look at the points column. You can see in his last 5 games, it's been up and down, much like a roller coaster ride. 20 points against Denver puts him over, and he drops all the way down to 6, shoots back up to 14, which is better, but still not good enough for an over on Richardson. 4 points against Portland, and then he jumps back up to 21 points against Portland. So, yes, the matchup looks pretty good here against Minnesota, but man, do I trust this guy? Probably not. He's only went over 14.5 fantasy points in 2 out of 5 games. And Lee, I know you mentioned trying to go over or wanting to go over on Josh Richardson, but so far, I got to tell you, not a big fan here. Not a big fan. Now, let's go over to lineups.com and see if we could pull up some season averages, some 30-game averages, and some 10-game averages on Josh Richardson. It would be helpful if I didn't pick the Minnesota Timberwolves and pick the Dallas Mavericks, the team he actually plays for. There we go. Josh Richardson for the season has scored 13.3 points. That would put him under. Now, his last 30 games, 13.2 points. So it's actually went down a percentage point, or 0.1 of a percentage point. In his last 10 games, 14.2 points. So it's went up a little bit, but man, all signs are pointing toward the under on Josh Richardson here. Unless somebody gets ruled out like Luka or Porzingis. I mean, I don't know. I'm just not feeling it so far. Let's take a look here at the various sports books. They've got him up at 14.5 points like PrizePicks. You see DraftKings, there's not really any action, any juice over or under on Richardson. They are split. On FanDuel, they're taking the under on Richardson at 14.5. On BetMGM, they're taking the under at 14.5. And finally, PointsBet is taking the overwhelmingly favorite under 14.5 points. So not liking the over here unless something happens and somebody's ruled out like Luka or Porzingis or one of these other guys who gets a lot of usage and a lot of fantasy points per minute. I would probably say lean toward the under on Josh Richardson. Thank you for the pick though, Lee. I appreciate that. The next thing we're going to start looking at is going to be single stat assist, and we've only got one in, and that's from, I'm going to say you pronounce it a threat. A threat. He is no threat though. He is a nice gentleman, and we appreciate having him in the community. So we're going to take a look at Jamal Murray, who is under assists. So thank you for that pick. Let's look at Jamal Murray and see if going under this 5 assist prop is the way to go for Bubble Murray, who hasn't been very bubbly lately for us. So we click on the Denver Nuggets here. We click on Jamal Murray's name. We could take a look at his recent game logs and see how he's been performing in the assist category. At 5 assists, he has went over, push, over, under. All right, so not a model of consistency in terms of dropping dimes. Over, push, over, under. So you can expect maybe a push or an over from the looks of things in his last 5 games here. Now, we're going to take a look at lineups.com, see how he's been doing on 5 assists for the season, for 30 games, and for 10-game averages. So we head over here, select Denver, move it over to the season averages, and you can see for the season, 4.8 assists puts him under the 5 assists for today. In his last 30 games, those assists have bumped up just a little bit. He's at 5 assists, which would be a push, like we talked about. He has pushed a couple times in his last 5 games. And then finally, in his last 10 games, his assists have spiked up to 5.2, which would be good enough for an over. Now, I would probably so far say that I would either take the over on Jamal Murray or just don't take him at all and look somewhere else. But we'll wrap things up here by going back over to RotoWire, and along the bottom here, you can see there's this bar. If we click the assist category, we can type in Jamal Murray's name. Not to be confused with DeJounte Murray from the San Antonio Spurs, but we've got Jamal Murray up on FanDuel at 5.5 assists. Now, on 5.5 assists, people are taking the under here. So they don't think that he's going to go for 6 or more assists in this game. They think he's definitely going to be under 5.5 assists. Now, what's under 5.5 assists? Well, 5 assists. So he's looking like a potential push here. Now, if we go over to PointsBet, the only other site that has him up, he's at 5.5 there, and people are strongly betting the under on Jamal Murray's 5.5 assists, which would put him at 5 or less. So I'm probably just not going to touch Jamal Murray unless you got some kind of itch, some hunch that Jamal Murray's just going to be dropping dimes left and right. He's more of a score first type of point guard. So I wouldn't expect him to have a major assist game here. So in terms of Jamal Murray under assists, I probably wouldn't take it at 5. I would probably take it if he was at 6. I would take the under. But at 5, I would probably lean toward the over and just hope for a push. But otherwise, I'm just not touching it. Now, the next single stat category we're going to talk about, we've got a few submissions here for rebound single stat. So the first one is going to be Colin Sexton. Colin Sexton over rebounds. Thanks to D. Rich Sosa for dropping that one my way. We're going to take a look at Colin Sexton and his single stat prop of 3 rebounds and see how Sexton's been doing rebounding the basketball for this Cavaliers squad. So we already talked about low totals for the Cleveland side of things, just 105 points expected to be scored by these Cavies. So let's take a look and see how he's been doing in terms of rebounds in his last few games. So we go all the way back here to Miami, where he faced them on March 16th. He had just 1 rebound, putting him under 3 for sure. But then he comes back here with 2 pretty good games, 7 and 5, putting him over and over. Then a 3 would be a push on today's projection. And finally, 4 puts him over that 3 rebound number. So all in all, in his last 5 games, he has went over 3 rebounds in 3 of them, 1 push, and 1 under. So kind of a mixed bag. You don't really know what you're going to get here with Colin Sexton. So we'll move on over back to lineups.com. We'll take a look at the Cleveland Cavaliers and see how Colin Sexton's been doing rebounding the basketball from a season perspective, a 30-game perspective, and finally a 10-game perspective. So for the season, he's pulling in just 2.8 rebounds, which leads me to believe that he's going to go under tonight. In his last 30 games, he goes up to 2.9 rebounds, which is still under 3, but a little bit better versus his season averages. And then in his last 10 games, rebounding the ball much better here. 3.6 rebounds, putting him well over the 3 you would need if you plan on taking the over there. Now finally, we're heading back to RotoWire. We're going to look at rebounds for Colin Sexton, see if they've got any props up on the various sports books. They do. DraftKings has him up at 2.5, and on 2.5, people are overwhelmingly taking the over on 2.5. So that's looking good. They think he's going to rebound 3 maybe even a little bit more. So on FanDuel, they've got him at 3.5, which people are betting the under on. So you can see big time favorite to go over 2.5 on DraftKings, big time favorite to go under 3.5 on FanDuel, which leaves you with 3 in the middle. And that's where he's at on PrizePicks. Now BetMGM, they've got him at 2.5. People are taking the over on the 2.5. So yeah, this looks like another setup here for a potential push situation. I don't like pushes. I like to win. Pushes are okay. You can win money when your guy pushes, but really we want guys to be a clear over or under, and this doesn't look like a real clear one on this prop of 3 rebounds. So I'm probably going to fade that one if I'm you, Mr. Sosa. So the next guy that I had a couple of people inquire about was Thaddeus Young over rebounds. He's at 7 rebounds on the board today on PrizePicks. So let's look at Thaddeus Young real quick. We'll go back to this game, Chicago-Cleveland. Thaddeus Young, we're going to look at his last few games and see what he's been up to in terms of rebounding the basketball here. All right, looking pretty solid here, I must say. You may have found another diamond in the rough, Austin. Got to give it to you, my man. In his last 5 games, 10 rebounds puts him well over 7. 8 puts him over. 10 puts him well over. 8 puts him over, and 9 definitely puts him over 7. So 5 games straight where he's went over 7 rebounds. If we go back a little further here, 7 would have been a push, which still makes you money. 10 puts him over. 8 puts him over. Really, he hasn't went under 7 rebounds since March 3rd, and that was against New Orleans way back when. So, yeah, the over has been looking pretty good here for Thaddeus Young. We're going to take a look at his other averages for the season, 30 games and for 10 games like we always do here. So we head over to lineups.com, select the Chicago Bulls, go on down here to Thaddeus Young. And you can see for the season, 6.5 rebounds, which is under 7. So not too good there. But the last 30 games, his rebounds spike up to 7.1 rebounds. Rebounding the ball much better in his last 30 compared to his overall season average. And then in his last 10 games, he goes up to 7.9 rebounds. So it's going up. Rebounds are trending in the right direction for the season, 30 and 10 game averages. Rebounding the ball much better here lately. We'll head back over to RotoWire. We're going to look for Thaddeus Young's name. And you can see he's up on DraftKings at 7.5 boards. At 7.5 boards, people are taking the under, which means they think he's going to have about 7 rebounds, maybe less. Now on FanDuel, he's at 6.5 boards. People are taking the over on that. So that's kind of putting him right on 7 tonight. On BetMGM, 7.5, people are taking the under. And then finally, PointsBet, overwhelmingly, people are taking the under on 7.5. So they think, somewhere under 7 or under rebounds. So I'm liking the 7. It's setting up for what could be a potential push here. So yeah, if I'm leaning one way or the other, I'd probably take the over on Thaddeus Young and hope for, at worst, a push. But I do like the over based on how consistently he's been rebounding the basketball. So nice pick there, Austin. Appreciate that one. The next guy we're going to talk about is Jakob Poeltl. He will be the last guy that we talk about in terms of rebounds. This is another pick submitted by a threat. He's liking Poeltl to go under rebounds. Now, we know Jakob Poeltl is a pretty big dude. He's facing off against the Los Angeles Clippers. He'll probably see a lot of Zubac, another big dude. So it's going to be a battle of the big dudes. 8.5 rebounds for Jakob Poeltl. Let's take a look at him on Roto Grinders real quick, and we'll see how he has been doing in his last few games in terms of rebounding the basketball. I know he cost me some money recently, a lot of money actually, when he failed to get enough rebounds to secure the over for me. But that was the past. Maybe he's been doing better. Let's just see. All right, on 8.5 rebounds, back on his 5th game, he got 12 boards, well over 8.5 there. 16, well over there. 12, well over. I think this is the game that he let me down with just 6 rebounds, of course. And then he bounces back in a big way against Charlotte, and he pulls down 11 boards. So I just happened to pick him on the night where he decides not to rebound the basketball like he normally does. So in his last 5, he goes over 8.5 rebounds in 4 out of 5. So far, so good for Jakob Poeltl. We'll head on over to Basketball Reference because I don't think that lineups.com has the San Antonio Spurs in there for whatever weird reason. So you can see his season average is 7.8 rebounds, which is under 8.5. So yeah, you know, maybe taking the under is the way to go, but the dude's been rebounding the ball pretty well in his last 5 games. I have to give it to him. He just happened to let me down on the night that I needed him the most. Now, if we head on over to RotoWire, we could take a look at the props for Jacob Poeltl. DraftKings Sportsbook, they have him at 8.5. Not really seeing any strong action under or over on that 8.5 so far. And the only other site that has him up is BetMGM at 8.5. A lot of people, well, not a lot, but the majority will say are taking the under on 8.5 rebounds. But I'm not really seeing a strong read on Poeltl one way or the other. This is probably a fade for me. I think we could find a better pick, and hopefully we do as we go into our final single stat category of the day, which is going to be the newly added 3-point single stat prop here on PrizePicks. Excited to talk about this one. So what it is 3-pointers made. You basically have to choose the over or the under on these guys when it comes to how many 3-pointers they'll make tonight. So 2 of the names that we had in this category, both submitted by Fushnik. I think that's how you say his name. Anthony Edwards, over 3 points. So they over 3-pointers. Well, now he's down at 2.5. So I'm not quite sure. Okay, over. He likes the over on 3-pointers made, and he's at 2.5. I think I got that figured out. Sorry about that. All right, so let's take a look at Anthony Edwards and see if we can kind of get a read on how he's been shooting the ball from downtown. Where's the Minnesota squad? There we go. Click on Anthony Edwards. We'll look at his game logs here, and specifically, we're looking at these 3 points attempted. He attempts quite a few, actually. It's more than I thought he would. But more importantly, how many of those is he making per game? So 2.5 is the number we need him to go if we're going to take the over 3-pointers made or more. So for the last 5 games, he has went over, 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 and then he goes under against OKC. So he's got 4 out of 5 games where he has went 3-pointers made or more. Liking the success rate so far for Anthony Edwards. Now, I also want to say thank you to Fushnik because he provided a pretty cool way to help research how many 3-pointers that teams are giving up and how many that the opponents are attempting and so on and so forth. So you can see here, OPP 3PA is the opponent's 3-point field goals attempted. So this is how many 3-pointers that the Dallas Mavericks opponent tonight, which is the Minnesota Timberwolves, are attempting per game. So as a team, let's see here, the Minnesota Timberwolves, 25.7 3-pointers attempted per game. Oh no, wait. Oh, sorry. Dallas rather. Their opponents are attempting 29 3-pointers per game, meaning they're one of the worst in the league. That teams are taking more 3-pointers against the Dallas Mavericks than most teams do typically. So they rank in the bottom 5 in that category. So that's looking good so far for Anthony Edwards, in case you're confused at home. The higher this number for the Dallas Mavericks, the better. We want as many 3-pointers attempted against the Mavericks as possible, since Anthony Edwards will be facing them tonight. There, I'm glad we got that cleared up. Now, opponent 3-point made. This is the amount of 3-pointers made against said teams. Now we look at the Dallas Mavericks. Of course, we've already talked about they're giving up 29 3-pointers per game. Of those 29 attempts against them, 10.5 go down against the Dallas Mavericks, which leads to a percentage of 36.3%. Now, to give you a better idea of how that ranks, well, 36.3 is not a very good success rate. Puts them kind of middle of the pack. So yes, they're allowing a lot of threes, but no, opponents aren't making a whole lot, or aren't making them at a high clip. To put that in perspective, 36% being middle of the pack, the team that's giving up the highest 3-point field goal percentage is the Minnesota Timberwolves, who allow almost 46 to 47% success rate on 3-point attempts against them. So hopefully that's clear for you. So far, Anthony Edwards looking like a pretty decent play on taking the over when it comes to 3-point attempts. Now, finally, RotoWire, thankfully for us, has a section dedicated to 3-point attempts, or 3-point field goals made, rather. So the DraftKings Sportsbook has him at 2.5. You don't really see any action over or under so far on that. But if you look at FanDuel, they got him at 2.5, and people are taking the over there. And finally, PointsBet on 2.5, people are taking the over. So yeah, I think, Mr. Fushnick, that you've got yourself a fairly good play here if you're wanting to take Anthony Edwards over 2.5 3-point attempts. I'm liking what I'm seeing. And finally, to end the video, to recap the entire thing, to cap it off, Jason Tatum. Fushnick, once again, liking the over on Jason Tatum, 3 points made. So Jason Tatum's going to have to make at least 3 balls for us in order for this to hit. Let's see if he can do it. We will head on over, click the Boston squad so we can get to Jason Tatum, and we'll scroll over a little bit and we'll look at his 3-point attempts and his 3-pointers made and his percentages in his last 5 games. So for those last 5, he's got 5 attempts. He converts on 3. That's good for 60%, which would put him over. The next game, attempt 7, connects on 4 for 57%, which would also put him over. The next game, 13 threes attempted against the Cavaliers, but he only makes 3. But still, we only need him to make 3 to go over. So that would be another over. His next game, 5 attempts, only makes 2 against Sacramento. That would put him under. And then finally against the Magic, my poor Orlando Magic, he attempts 8 3 balls, makes 5 of them for 63%, which means he would go well over 2.5 3-pointers made. So far, 4 out of 5 games for Jason Tatum, he has made 3 or more 3-pointers. So I'm liking what I'm seeing so far here. Now he's facing the Milwaukee Bucks tonight. So let's take a look at how many 3-pointers that the Milwaukee Bucks allow per game. Well, 29.8 attempts against the Milwaukee Bucks from 3 here, which puts him in the bottom 3, 28th overall. They're allowing a lot of 3-pointers against them per game. Now, how many are teams making? Well, they're making about 10.3. So over 10 of those 3-pointers attempted against them go in, which leads to a percentage of 34.5%. Not a great percentage. That puts them, right around the middle of the league here in terms of 3-pointers made against them, the success rate of those 3s that go up. So they allow a lot of 3s, do the Milwaukee Bucks, but they're like middle of the road in terms of how many of those 3s actually hit the bottom of the net. But I like the potential here for Jason Tatum to get a lot of volume, a lot of 3s up in this game. So yeah, I think the over might make some sense here. Now, last but not least, we're going to wrap things up for this video and for this projection by looking at the various sports books. Now, DraftKings has them up at 2.5, not seeing any action over or under. FanDuel has them up at 2.5 though, and people are taking the over. On BetMGM, he's at 2.5. People are taking the under. And finally, PointsBet, they got him at 2.5, and people are taking the under. So, hey, it's not looking very clear and cut here on the various sports books. So, Fushnick, this might be one you want to avoid, but I am liking that Anthony Edwards one. But that's going to do it for today's video, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. Sorry if it was long-winded. Sorry about the technical difficulties and the internet going out in the middle of the video. Hopefully you found some value in this one. If you did, hit the thumbs up, please, and drop a comment below. Let me know what types of things you'd like to see in future videos. Is it more fantasy point projection breakdowns? Is it more single stat point projection breakdowns? Maybe it's assists. Maybe it's rebounds. Maybe it's this new 3-point feature that they've added. Let me know in the comment section below. This is CJ for Out of Bounds DFS. I appreciate you guys tuning in for another video. And until the next time, guys, good luck tonight. Let's win some money on PrizePicks. Peace.